This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and our guest today is Bill Myers. There's a lot we could say about Bill by way of introduction, and I'll just hit a couple of highlights. Let me start with his educational background. He's a graduate of Virginia State University, having majored in music, and has 2 master's degrees from East Carolina University, one in music and one in education. And the music piece reflects who Bill is and what his life has been about. We'll touch on some other things as we go along, Bill, but let me stop there and say welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Bill, speaking of music and education, tell us how you got started in music.
I knew at the beginning of my life, basically, that I wanted to be a musician. I was inspired by my grandmother, and I had a wonderful band director named Bob Lewis, who was a saxophone player from Virginia State, incidentally. I wanted to be just like him. He was my idol. I literally worshiped the man. And so he inspired me to go to Virginia State and do that. And in doing so, I became a band director. I went to the military and then continued my musical activities there, playing behind Broadway stars like Rita Moreno, Joan Russell, who would come and entertain the troops, and we would play. And our plan was to do some better things and bigger things once we got back to the States. But music has been my life.
Where were you in the service?
I was in the Army. I received some training down at Fort Benning, Georgia, and then we went on. They sent me to Korea for the next 16 months, and then I was in the reserve for another 6 years.
And in Korea, that was just after the war there?
After the war, we were stationed just about 5 miles below the 38th parallel, and not knowing when the North Koreans were going to try to invade again, we were still carrying loaded weapons.
Well, I haven't said anything about your age, but your experience in Korea suggests something about that. You turned 86 this past December?
86 this past December.
Well, I tell you, you carry your age well.
Thank you.
You look like you're in terrific shape.
Thank you.
Let me have you back up, if I could, and have you tell us something about your very early days in music.
I was raised by my grandmother, and in her home she had a piano. And people would come to visit, and they would actually sit down to play the piano. And as a child, I would watch them and see how they would put their fingers on the keys, and just beautiful sounds that came from that piano. So it was my grandmother who noticed that I had a certain knack for picking out what I had seen, and I was not banging on the piano like most children would do, but I was actually trying to place my fingers on those keys to make the same music that I had seen and heard earlier. So it's my uncle, Ernest, and he actually showed me a song, and I learned to play that song just by putting my fingers on the keys that he had told me. And so from that, my grandmother decided that I needed to take piano lessons. So she sent me across town to a lady named Miss Lena Cherry, who was a church organist, and she charged 50 cents a lesson, and I would walk over to her house once a month to take these lessons, which I did not like to do. Mm-hmm. In fact, I will confess that sometimes I would go to the movies instead and not go take my lessons. I regret that now. I wish I'd gone every time. But that was my beginning, and then eventually I was playing one day in the church, and of all things, I was playing the Star Spangled Banner. And the Sunday school superintendent heard me. He said, "You need to be playing for the Sunday school." And so I started playing for Sunday school at 12 years old. And after doing that, I went to the military and played there. They had me going from compound to compound in Korea, providing church services and playing the piano. When I got out of that, I came back to Wilson and got a job teaching. One of the ministers heard that I was in town and came to my home one Sunday and said, "My organist is out and I need somebody to come and play for church service. This is a Baptist church." And I said, "Well, I'm a Methodist, and I'll be going to the Methodist church." He said, "Listen, just come and play this one Sunday for me on that." And I wound up playing at that church, a Baptist church, for 30 years. 30 years I played there. Then he died. And I soon left and went back to my roots, the Methodist church where I was raised. And I became the organist there and played there for another 25 years before I officially announced my retirement a couple of years back. I said, I'm retired from this now. I think I've served.
You have indeed. And Bill, you jumped over a lot of years there. I know there's a lot that went on in between, too.
Oh, yeah, a lot that went on in between, yes.
Let me have you, if you would, tell us about this first song you've selected, and maybe we can fill in a few of those gaps. Otis Redding's Sitting on the Dock of the Bay.
Yes.
Why is that one special to you?
Well, I used to play with Otis. You'd come through as musicians would at that time and pick up musicians along the way. And so we played with Otis several times. And Otis was different. He didn't have music for us to read. He would explain what he wanted us to do. And he would tell us, and he's now, when I turn around like this, you got to go dun 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 or something. I play some lick on the horns. And I remember so clearly the first show we did with him, we didn't quite have it just like he wanted. And he really fussed us out. He said, "You guys messed up my show. Those women should have been all over me, and they were not." And so anyway, the second show went very well. And then the next night we were at that particular venue for 2 nights, and the second one went very well. We had him down. That we knew when he stomped what to do, and when he turned this way, we knew exactly what to do.
What instrument were you playing?
I was playing saxophone at that time.
Playing sax.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear the song, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes.
That was Otis Redding, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. If you're just joining us, our guest today on Grace Notes is Bill Myers. Bill, we've already talked a little bit about your background in music. Tell us more about your educational involvement and background. And let me have you start, if you could, by how you ended up going to college. It strikes me that in those times that was not something that was very common.
You're exactly right. I credit that to my teachers. I went to Epps High School in Greenville, North Carolina, and we were basically taught that high school wasn't the end, that you had to do something else. And I never thought about not going to college. And because Bob Lewis, the man I mentioned earlier about being my band director, had inspired me so much, I knew I wanted to go to Virginia State. And so I went. I got there, and it was funny because I wanted to be a music major. And when I got in line to register as a music major, they said, what do you play? And I said, well, I play the saxophone. And they said, well, you have to audition, I said, I don't have a saxophone. I said, let me get this straight. You come to be a music major and you don't own a horn? I said, no, I do not. So I had to go to my audition. And when I went in, I said, I don't have a horn. And so I remember the professor said, well, let's talk through this. Tell me and show me 3 ways to finger B flat on the saxophone. So I have to say, well, you put your little finger up here like this, down the line. And I have this imaginary horn in my head, and I'm explaining how you match the side key up here like this on the, and looked at me like, man, where in the world did you come from in here with this? And so they gave me a job, and I was able to eventually buy a saxophone. I remember very well. It was a Conn saxophone, $250. It was a joy in my life to own my own instrument.
How did you learn to play the sax without owning one?
Well, that's another good story. There was a gentleman in Greenville who played, we call him the Serenader. Every Christmas he would go around and play Christmas carols. He was in a band called the Elks Band. Well, my grandmother knew him. His name was James Thomas Edmondson. So she said, James, my grandson really wants to play the saxophone. Would you mind showing him how to do this and leaving your horn here a little bit? He says, of course I'll do this.
You ended up in music education yourself.
Yes, I did. I was a band director. Mm-hmm.
How did that happen?
Well, as I went, I wanted to be a band director. I wanted to be like Bob Lewis. So I went through that curriculum, but I was an ROTC. So when I graduated, I was a second lieutenant, which meant that I had to go into the military for at least 2 years of active duty and 6 years in the reserve. So I was sent immediately to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then from there into Korea.
And you got into education, music education yourself when you got back then?
Yeah, I did that. That was not my plan. My plan was to be a big famous musician and playing in New York and other places, because I'd met this gentleman in Korea who was from Brooklyn, New York, and he and I were going to form this saxophone duo group and just become very, very famous. But my parents talked me into staying 1 year in North Carolina, and that's what I decided to do. I would stay 1 year, and then I would pursue my dream of being a big-time famous musician. But I got caught up in education. I went to a little school in Elm City, North Carolina, Frederick Douglass High School. And when I got there, I was bitten. I saw students who weren't inspired to do too much. They were satisfied with their being and just staying in Elm City. And I was being very careful not to ever condemn that, but I was trying to show them that there was so much that they were missing. That
there were other options.
There were other options, places they hadn't been, things they didn't know anything about. And it was almost like God God had sent me there to do something about that. And so I started my little crusade. I started taking them places. I even put them in a bus and took them down to the ocean. I said, listen, there it is right there. That is the second largest body of water in the world. There's the Atlantic Ocean right there. Come on, let's go put your feet in it. And it was funny because what did the kids say? Is that it? I said, yes, that's it, but I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know how close you are to the ocean, how close you are to the mountains. You've never done these things. And so I started to opening some eyes, and I could see the difference that I was making, because now we're talking about something that you can do. That's not a big thing, that you can actually do these things. And I could see their spirits coming alive and say, hey, I want to do this.
Well, Bill, it strikes me just hearing you talk that you would be a terrific addition on any high school faculty, and you remind me of the relatively few teachers that inspired me. What a great thing.
Teaching is so important.
And you ended up doing it for how long?
Well, I was a teacher for maybe about 14 years, and I was happy about it. But the principal died. And so when the superintendent came over, I was kind of named as the assistant principal. And then school integration came, and we were moved to what had been the white school. And I was assistant principal there and music teacher. And then I became principal of Elm City High School. Then in 1988, I was asked to apply for a position as assistant superintendent of Wilson County Schools. And I did that, and I got the position, and I stayed that for another 8 years in that position as assistant superintendent. So I retired as assistant superintendent of Wilson County Schools.
I'm going to let you make the transition here to Roberta Flack. Okay. You've identified another song.
Yeah.
A beautiful, well-known song. First Time Ever I Saw Your Face.
Yeah.
Tell us about
Flack.
it. Yeah. Why is that one?
We organized a band called the Monitors back in 1957. My roommate, whose name was Cleveland Flo, his sister was at Howard, and her roommate was Roberta Flack. And so we called her and we asked her to be our vocalist, and she agreed. So she only stayed there 1 year, and so for the year, we played all over Eastern North Carolina. And I don't know if people really appreciate the lady's talent, but she's a fine, fine, fine musician. We know her voice, but few people know of her talents on the piano. Classical trained pianist from right here in Black Mountain, North Carolina, but who was one heck of a piano player.
Let's hear the song, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, by Roberta Flack.
The first
Roberta Flack, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. If you're just joining us, our guest is Bill Myers. Bill, we've been talking about your background both music-wise and education-wise. Bill has won a number of awards, including the North Carolina Heritage Award, the Folk Life Award. Bill served as the first minority president of the Arts Council of Wilson, and I actually could go on and on. But Bill, let me stop there and have you tell us about your own personal experience with segregation and then ultimately integration.
Oh, how much time do you have on that?
There's a lot you could say, isn't there?
Great deal I could say, because I'm a product of segregation. I never understood why I could go to a building and I could not be served, but I was obedient because my parents taught me to do that. But I never understood it. Even in the military, I'm in the military with my uniform, and as I would travel to Fort Benning, Georgia, I would have to get gasoline. Then I could stop at the filling stations and ask to use the restroom, and told that there was no restroom for me. So it was a hard time. And music was the same way. As I played in all kinds of clubs and country clubs, it was all right for me as a band person because I was working, but I was not there to dance. So we were there playing. I used to play with minstrel shows.
Minstrel shows,
yes. And whites would come to the show, but there was a big rope that would go down the center of the tent, whites on one side and blackers on the other side. But music has that draw. You see, people, as we would play and the music would get hot, the whites would come across the rope, and people would start dancing with each other, and the police would come in and try to break it up. But those kinds of things we ran into everywhere we went. I guess that's one reason why I did not choose to go on the road a great deal, because there were no hotels for us. And as we would play, we would have to stay in people's homes. I can remember playing up in Nags Head at the Nags Head Casino, and we played, and we had to stay in a lady's house. She actually pulled down the steps to go up into the attic, and we had to go up there and had mattresses spread out up there, and that's where we slept. And there were conditions like that. Even from the minstrel shows, we had to go to a neighbor's house to borrow some water to bathe. I said, no, this is not what I want to be doing. I don't need to be doing it. I love playing the music. I love the musicians. I learned a great deal, but the lifestyle was something that I wanted no parts of.
I know from talking with you before we came into the studio that you have been connected for a good number of years now with the Oliver Nestis Freeman Roundhouse and African American Museum in Wilson. Tell us about that.
Oliver Nestis Freeman was a stonemason, good friends of Booker T. Washington and a Wilsonian. And he wanted to build houses for GIs, black GIs specifically, coming from World War II. He started building affordable housing in Wilson. And one of his most unique houses was a house that was round. He started scrounging up materials in the house. It just has all sorts of things in it. About 800 square feet. And people actually lived in the house. It had 3 rooms, a living room, a bedroom, and a kitchen in that little house. But it sat abandoned for several years. And one of the city councilmen had an idea, said, wouldn't this make a great museum because it's such a unique house? And so as an interested citizen, I went to city council meeting one night and I said, I came to endorse the idea. And so I was met with a challenge that said, Bill, if such a good idea, where's your money? And I said, I did not come with any money. I came with an endorsement. I'm just asking you guys to vote for this and let's move this house and turn it into a museum. After all, the history of African Americans in this city is not documented any place. And so I think these people should be remembered. And lucky for me and us, the program was televised. And the very next day, people came to my home bringing checks. And Secretary of Cultural Resources at that time was Betty McLean. Betty had some money left in one of her funds that went unspent. She said, Bill, I'm going to give you this money. I got $25,000 in this account. I want you to have it for this museum. I went back to city council, said, hey, I got your money. So we hired a gentleman to come in to move the building, put it on the back of a truck, placed it down, but then it was in really, really, really bad shape, just falling to pieces. But people saw what was happening. People would pass there and say, hey, this is a good idea. I want to help. One gentleman came by and said, I'll paint it for you, free of charge. Whitley's electric said, I'll do the wiring, free of charge. The teachers from Sally B. Howard School in Wilson came and said, we're going to do some landscaping, free of charge. And it started to happen because at first it was only my wife and myself trying to do all of this. But these people came and volunteered. So when Wilson applied to be an All-America city, this was one of the projects that was mentioned highly and got us over to getting that award.
It was one of the selling points.
One of the selling points, yes. So it's still there. It's a big tourist attraction now. And this past October, we were able to open an additional building that were able to house documents and artifacts from long ago. We discovered there was a black newspaper in Wilson called the Wilson Blade. Nobody knew that. And so, but we have now the history of those things like that, so our kids can come in, hopefully be motivated to say, if they did it back then with few resources that they had, I can do it now. We want our seniors to remember how it used to be and how they can improve things and make things better.
And you serve as the executive director?
I am still the executive director, yes. I'm serving at this moment, yes.
Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
What is represented there.
Thank you.
Tell us, Bill, as we wind down, what you consider your top 2 or 3 things in your life that you're most proud of.
I'm most proud of my family. I love my family. I love my wife. We've been married 55 years. Love my kids. As we're planning to get married, my wife had some surgery. And the doctor called me into his office and said, Bill, says, I tell you this, but your wife probably will not be able to have any children. I said, well, I'm not marrying her for children. I'm marrying her because I love her. And, well, we went on our honeymoon, basically, and pow, she's with child. You know? So I called my first child my miracle child because we were not expecting that at all.
This is your son?
This is my son who lives in Atlanta right now.
Your wife's name is Diana?
Diana, that's correct, yeah. And so then we got another one. So I got 2 kids, Michael and Michelle. So I'm so proud of them. I love them to death, and I'm so proud of their achievements. Other things I'm happy about, the achievements in music. As I said, I received the state award from the North Carolina Arts Council. We toured with the North Carolina Symphony for a couple of weeks in North and South Carolina. We were able to play at the Smithsonian for a week when they did a tribute to R&B music.
We being the Monitors.
We being the Monitors, that's correct. So I'm pleased with that. That I was able to do the things I did in education and help a lot of children. And also for my own therapeutic needs in music, I was able to also satisfy that. And I'm still doing that. Even at 86, I'm still playing, yes.
Yeah, I can see, I can hear, Bill, that you haven't exactly wound down.
No, and I hope I don't. I hope I don't. Someone asked me, when are you going to stop blowing that horn? And I said, when God takes the breath out of me, that's when I will stop.
Tell us, Bill, about The Force.
The Force is a piece that I wrote. It was about the time that Star Wars came out, and they talked about the Force. And so I said, I'm going to call this song The Force. It's been a theme song that's been very successful for us. We use it all the time to open our concerts. For an example, we played for the last 45 years, Greenville Sunday in the Park. And so all 45 years, we've opened with The Force. People like it. It's a nice, upbeat piece, and we have a lot of fun with it.
Well, Bill, it's been a treat to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
My treat. Thank you for having me.
Let's go out with The Force by the Monitors, founded by Bill Myers in 1957.